American English translation. Before anything else, let me align something with you. Broncos country. What you're going to hear in this video is not insider news. It's not privileged information. It's not a medical diagnosis. And it's not an official announcement from anyone within the Denver Broncos organization or the NFL. Everything here is analysis, scenario reading, interpretation of what has been said publicly, and reflection on narratives that have been circulating on social media and in sports media. Nothing replaces official statements from the team, the NFL, or formal comments made at press conferences. With that clear, let's talk about the current moment of the Denver Broncos. Hey, what's up, Broncos country? Welcome to another video. Those moments when you pause for a few seconds and reflect on the path the team is taking? Not just looking at raw stats or isolated results, but trying to understand the process, the direction, and the bigger context. We're at the beginning of the 2026 preseason. And when I look at the Denver Broncos today, the feeling that comes to mind is a very clear mix of cautious optimism. Not the blind optimism of someone who ignores problems, but also far from the chronic pessimism that marked so many recent phases of this franchise. What we see is a team that, over the course of last season, showed consistent signs that it can compete within the AFC, even in an extremely tough conference. There were games where the team showed resilience, the ability to adjust, and most importantly, identity. That doesn't mean everything was perfect, far from it, but it does indicate that a foundation is being built. The defense, for example, showed in several moments a real ability to respond under pressure, especially against elite quarterbacks in the league. In key games, we saw tactical adjustments, better communication in the secondary, and a more consistent physical presence from the front seven. All of that points to the maturation of a group that, in other seasons, simply collapsed in critical moments. On offense, the development of the quarterback was one of the most discussed topics. Bo Nix arrived in the NFL surrounded by the natural questions any rookie faces: adapting to the pro-game speed, post-snap reads, decision-making under pressure, and mechanical consistency. Over time, what we saw was gradual progress. Not linear, not perfect, but real. On the field, he began to show more comfort in the pocket, better progression reads, and most importantly, the ability to use mobility as a tool, not a crutch. In several third-down situations, scrambles and extended plays turned into first downs that changed the flow of games. That doesn't always show up in traditional box scores, but it shows up in game impact. All of this is happening under the leadership of Sean Payton, a head coach with a well-known track record in the league. Not because that guarantees automatic success, but because it brings something the Broncos lacked for a long time: philosophical consistency. The offense shows clear concepts, consistent use of play action, varied run schemes, and real attempts to exploit mismatches, especially with receivers who offer a mix of size and speed. Players like Courtland Sutton continue to be central pieces, while others contribute in specific ways within the scheme. The offensive design looks more connected to the roster's actual strengths, something that was missing in previous eras. However, as always with teams that start showing signs of upward momentum, parallel narratives begin to emerge. Recently, one of them gained traction on social media: an alleged tension between the quarterback and the head coach, tied to a physical situation involving the player. This is where it's important to pause. What is publicly verifiable is simply that comments, interpretations, and clipped quotes circulated on digital platforms. Everything else, intentions, internal atmosphere, psychological impact, falls into the realm of speculation. And that's exactly where analysis needs to be handled with care. In my view, the core of this story isn't necessarily the literal content of a single comment or the momentary physical condition of a player, but how narratives are built and amplified when a team starts to become a threat. Throughout recent NFL history, this pattern repeats itself often. Teams deep in rebuilds rarely generate this kind of noise. But when a team begins to show real competitiveness, any small detail becomes fuel for controversy. Within this context, there were interpretations tied to a specific episode involving an important game last season. A physical play, a momentary scare, something absolutely common in football. From there, Comments made in controlled or semi-public settings took on a life of their own once removed from context. The most important thing to reinforce here is this: there has been no official release of a detailed diagnosis, no public confirmation of timelines, and no concrete evidence of internal conflict. What exists are external readings trying to fill in gaps with speculation. When you look at the quarterbacks, public posture in interviews and media appearances, the tone has been calm, professional, and aligned with the coaching staff. There has been no display of resentment, rupture, or distrust. On the contrary, his comments have emphasized partnership, learning, and long-term focus. That's a key point. In real internal conflicts, signs usually surface quickly. Body language, evasive answers, public jabs. None of that has clearly materialized here. Another factor that weighs into this analysis is the franchise's recent history. Broncos fans know very well what instability looks like. After Super Bowl 50, the organization went through a long stretch in the wilderness. Quarterbacks who never settled in, failed trades, projects cut short before they could mature. Denver saw head coaches come and go with very different philosophies, some well-intentioned, others clearly overmatched for the job. There were moments when the team seemed unsure of who it was or where it was going. That phase begins to change when the organization commits to structure and long-term vision. The arrival of the current ownership group marked a significant inflection point, not just because of financial investment, but because of a focus on institutional stability, modern processes, and off-field support, training facilities, medical departments, data analysis, player support. All of this contributes to a more professional and attractive environment. It doesn't guarantee championships, but it dramatically increases the odds of better decision-making over time. Back on the field, physical situations during preseasons and off-seasons are common, and, in most cases, part of the sport's natural wear and tear. The practical impact of those situations, especially when they occur outside the main competitive calendar, tends to be limited. This period is used precisely for tactical adjustments, integrating new players, studying opponents, and collective development. Quarterbacks, in particular, often use this time for intensive mental work, film study, and technical refinement. Another important takeaway from this situation is the relevance of roster depth. No competitive franchise survives without planning for the unexpected. Having options in the quarterback room, a solid and versatile offensive line, and a functional run game is a core part of the equation. Last season, we saw how quarterback consistency helps stabilize other units, especially the offensive line. More coordinated protection, better communication, and less panic in adverse situations. That doesn't happen by accident. It's the result of repetition, trust, and leadership. In the long run, external narratives rarely define real strategic decisions inside NFL franchises. What matters are internal data, formal medical evaluations, on-field performance, and development projections. Social media noise is usually fleeting. In fact, this kind of noise often resonates most with rival fan bases. Chiefs, Raiders, Chargers all have their own narrative interests. When a rival starts to get its footing, any opportunity for symbolic destabilization gets exploited. But when you look at things objectively, what you see in Denver today is a young roster with talent at key positions. A defense that shows identity, and an offense under construction, led by an experienced coach. That's not nothing. Players like Pat Certain, too, remain defensive pillars. The run game shows signs of recovery after difficult seasons. The coaching staff appears aligned in both message and execution. And the quarterback, the most scrutinized piece of the franchise, is showing growing maturity. None of this means the path is guaranteed. The AFC remains brutal. There are more established organizations, quarterbacks in their prime, and razor-thin margins for error. But there's something Denver hasn't had in a long time: clear direction. In the end, this so-called controversy says more about how information circulates in the digital age than it does about any real crisis. A comment taken out of context, amplified by algorithms, becomes a headline. Then it becomes a debate. Then it becomes a narrative. It's up to the fan to filter. It's up to the organization to stay focused. And it's up to the players to respond where they always respond best: on the field. If the Denver Broncos can stay on this path, ignoring the noise, strengthening their processes, and developing talent, the future could look very different from the recent past. And now I want to hear from you. Broncos country. Is all of this just a passing distraction? Or do you think it reveals something deeper about how the league operates today? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. The journey continues, and it's getting more interesting by the day.